Hello, welcome back to Tales of the Obran Spin. Today, we will explore various different aspects of my game, starting from the player controller, then one of the main interfaces of the game, 3D models, and lastly, a couple of things that didn't quite go to plan. The player controller's life started like any other script's life, through a tutorial on YouTube. Specifically, this tutorial by Legion Games, as I still wasn't too comfortable with the engine to start working on it by myself. This tutorial, in my opinion, is great to get started as it introduces you to many different concepts along with some juice which makes any project feel better instantly. This foundation for my player controller lasted quite a bit because when I got done with it, I almost instantly transitioned to working on the dialogue balloon, which took me a lot of effort and time to get it where I wanted to. Then one day, I was trying to implement another feature and I noticed something that was pretty aggravating. To put it mildly, the code was a mess.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
It was, yes, functional, but incredibly scattered, full of magic numbers and overlapping things that were in places where they shouldn't be. At this moment, I decided that a full restructure of the code was in order, and this is when I stumbled upon the FPS series by Stay at Home Dev. This series of tutorials, again, in my opinion, is incredibly informative, well structured, and builds upon itself with each episode while being clear, simple to follow, and very well organized. With the player controller in a decent state, it's time we move on to one of the pillars of the gameplay loop, which is this PC interface. But what does the gameplay loop entail exactly? I want you to consult this image. A typical day in Michael's life goes like this. You'd start at his apartment, then you'd go into a transitional space and then into the alleyways of Tosrig or through a custom area. After exploring, gathering clues and resolving puzzles, you are then allowed to continue to the Compendium of Light building. After that, the player will face the outside world once more before being allowed to go back home. At his shift is where the player will operate Michael's computer, where one of three activities will be taken upon. The first is document reduction. The player will be given a document where certain words are outlined. Upon clicking on an outlined word, the player will be given the choice to replace the word with one of four options. Each of these have a certain weight to them, which means that in theory there is a best version of the document and a possible worst version of the document. Next up is a transcription mechanic, inspired by the game Devlog Department. There's not really much to say about this one. Compared to the reduction mechanic, it's quite simple, as the player only has to, transcribe what they see on the left portion of the screen onto the right part of the screen. This mechanic has a scoring system too that is a little more complicated than that of the reduction mechanic. Basically, upon completion, the whole text that is given by the player is compared to what the text should be with something called the Levenstein distance, which checks how similar the two strings are, and then with some mathematical shenanigans, a homogeneous score is determined. Lastly, we have to find the date of a given document. Not really much to say here either, just match the date on the document and that's it. And that's all for the computer. What you've seen here is still a placeholder version, but eventually it will look more like a proper computer with all the bells and whistles of a proper interface. Next up, Tao will be talking about his work on the 3D models. Please enjoy.
Hello, my name is Corbin. Some of my online collaborators know me as Tao. Just a bit about me, I've been using Blender off and on since about 2015, just kind of messing around. I completed a 2-year trade school during high school, earning certifications in computer science, application and software development. I'm certified in JavaScript, Python, and HTML and CSS. In terms of hobbyist and unpaid work, I've done a bit of animation, script writing, editing, video editing. I used to write shitty sci-fi and fantasy novels in and out of high school, but I digress. Today, I'm here to tell you guys a bit about what I've been working on for IRATO. So I've been tackling the brunt of the 3D modeling, anything from background objects like trash cans and desks to hero models like the player model or the weapons he uses. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the pipeline we've been using up to now and talk to you guys about how we've adapted it and continued to tweak and bend it as we move through the project to make sure it's doing what we need it to do. I remember some of the earliest work I did for this project was modeling the main character's apartment. For me, that meant taking a little sketch of the layout the director made and kind of turning that into a mock-up scene, which is what you're looking at now. At the time, we were thinking this could be a great space to test out some of the basic early interactions, picking up, manipulating objects, making simple animation on interaction scripts for opening drawers and cabinets, while also figuring out if we need to tweak the apartment for the needs of the project, etc. A lot of this modeling would actually end up being placeholder assets, but there's still quite a bit here that's perfectly fine for final release once it's painted. And we'll get into painting in a moment, But yeah, you will realize that not much of this has been painted, and I will explain why a bit later. So we actually ended up switching gears a little bit, and so I left the apartment where it was for now, and reprioritized. I can go back to those assets and kind of touch them up and give them the attention that each of them deserve. But like I said, we kind of switched gears a little bit. When you have a very small dev team spread across multiple time zones, operating on different work and university schedules, we quickly found it was important to work on things that would buy each other the most time. For me, that meant getting the weapons and player model done, so that when other devs had time, they could work on the animations, particles, and systems involving each of the weapons and making sure they play well with the player model. Now, we're still fine-tuning and figuring out what we need from each weapon as we go, but finishing the handgun and shotgun was really useful in terms of getting our programming lead the tools he needed to start working on the task of making them do something in engine, while we chip away at other projects and background assets. Gives him something to work on. The footage playing now is from right after a dev meeting. I first modeled a base handgun frame, taking inspiration from the simplicity of the 1911 per director's notes, and then worked in other weapons that served for my inspiration of the weapon, including the Kel-Tec CP33 and the Luego Arms Alien. Obviously, the final product bears little resemblance to any of those, but that was kind of the point. I really like the high-tech kind of aesthetics that those weapons give off, and I wanted to make sure they were incorporated into the final model. So yeah, off screen with pen and paper, I sketched on top of some of the printouts I made of that frame, and just kind of brainstormed the look I was going for. I knew I really wanted to incorporate some sort of magnetism, like electromagnetism. I love electromagnetism. Everything magnets. I love magnets. So I went to the director with the first batch of sketches, and he and I kind of went back and forth a bit on what we did and didn't like about each of the designs. And so I took the design that resonated the most with us and the notes that we made, and then I went ahead and created another batch of concepts, which is actually, you can see that in the background of this viewport here. I was modeling pretty much directly based off of that, using it as reference. I will say I ran into a bit of difficulty modeling everything one-to-one here. I actually was able to sprinkle in some of my own creativity here with the idea of the ferrofluid projectile magnets, which was great because now I don't need to figure out how to fit in this little case ejection spot here I made, which works on the 2D sketch. Looks like it makes sense, but ultimately falls apart when I was, in 3D. Pretty similar thing to the shotgun, but not at all. It started with me just kind of taking an older version of the handgun that wasn't going to get used, and I just looked at Boba Fett's blaster while watching YouTube, and I just kind of did my own thing. I showed screenshots as I went to the director, and he kind of gave me notes here and there about, certain dimensions of different parts of it, but overall he was really happy with it. The design most closely resembles a firearm I thought up for a scrapped graphic novel, actually, but I could not find those sketches in time to meet this video's deadline. Next, I'd like to touch on the player model, which I kind of bit myself on the ass with, and we'll talk about the silver lining that came with that as we go here. So starting on this model, I thought I could get a quick, ready-to-use model for in-engine testing. Nothing final, just placeholder. So I found some Creative Commons Zero, public domain, low poly models that I kind of just stitched together. It was a body I liked, a head I liked, and then some arms that were made for first-person shooter use, but I just cut the arms off the old model and stitched these ones on. So yeah, stitched them together, added a metahuman armature, deleted the face bones I wasn't going to use, and just hit apply with automatic weights. This worked terribly. I was plagued with bones moving completely unrelated limbs and vertices, and so I took a break from all that rigging BS and decided for some reason to go ahead and model his clothes. and his hair, since I knew we were going to need the clothes as a separate element for a certain part of the game. It was around this time that I started matching the model to the portrait concept art from one of our artists. Here's a little comparison there between the render that I made and the concept art. You might notice that this model has some varying textures between the skin and different articles of clothing, and this is not the final paint. I just needed a way to clearly see where the normals were fighting and where clipping was happening, so I could address that straight out of the gate. And then I went back and decided to bang my head against the armature and rigging wall. I manually weight painted the model maybe 2.5 times.
How's this looking, guys, huh? Huh? It's hot in here.
Before just realizing it'd be easier to redo the majority of the model's topology. I would later realize it was not the easiest solution, but it's what I did anyway. So yeah, I actually ended up redoing the entirety of the model piece by piece, deleting and redoing limbs, looking at some references as I went. The hands were the worst, but actually they were one of the main things causing me issues with the automatic weight painting. So yeah, I finished the model, started on manually weight painting everything again when I realized I should just try and see if the automatic weight painting would play well with the new model that I had now, and it absolutely did. That was all the biting myself in the butt, kind of doing a bunch of weight painting and redoing the entire model when I should have just done it from scratch from the get-go. The silver lining is I now have a rig. I could implement some inverse kinematics to make things a little easier on the animation end, and there's a bit of work left in making different versions of the model. We want to have a few variations on the clothing and such, and then the texturing, of course, will be its own thing. But yeah, this guy is basically 80% done in his entirety, and in his current state, he's ready to be played around with in the engine, which is kind of the most important part, is making sure that the skeleton can be animated properly in the engine. We can always mess around with topology, textures, and clothes, and all that stuff afterwards. But making sure that that skeleton works properly with the guns is kind of the most important thing right now. Everything else can be fine-tuned later. Now, remember what I said about painting?
Hi, welcome back. Glad you could join me today.
Well, the main reason we haven't dipped our toes into that portion yet is because we're essentially still in the gray boxing phase. Making sure everything works, making sure our systems work, making sure our environments are dynamic, making sure everything's easy to traverse. You're not hitting any brick walls like I did with the painting.
Just gonna get right in there. Oh, shit. Okay, well, that's wrong. Okay, sorry. Shit. Ah, fuck. I fucked it. Ah, fuck. Fuck. Ah, shit. I bent it and I fucked it.
It was also an internal decision to kind of hold off on the paint until the vision for the game's style is completely thought out. So when we start painting, everything will match in both style and aesthetic, and also in quality. One of the scenarios that we were talking about in one of our dev meetings is if I'm over here painting dumpsters and guns, and is over there painting coffee cups and ammo pickups, we wouldn't want to then start implementing those and having a 2K coffee cup next to PS2 textured dumpster. With our team and how tight-knit we are and where we're at with the project currently, nothing like that would ever happen, but it's just an example for why we'd want to hold off on painting and any compositing really until we're absolutely sure of the style, aesthetics, color palettes we're going to be using. We really want to limit the amount we're having to backtrack and redo work, and again, just make sure that we are working as efficiently as our means allow. It can be a difficult balance trying to make sure we're getting work done efficiently and quickly. Getting the basics in and established without getting burnt out relearning the basics with a new engine. Sometimes in a dev meeting, we'll kind of keep that burnout at bay by discussing new ideas or systems or environments that we're excited about, but it can get kind of messy, priority-wise. A lot of studios have really been bitten by letting their ideas outpace them. Feature creep is a real thing. But so far, we've been striking that balance very well. We can all kind of rein each other in on that front, which has been great for helping us stay away from feature creep, but has also helped strengthen the way we communicate and hold space for those ideas. You know, when you have a handful of creatives collaborating on something like this while giving our own creative input, staying true to the project lead or director's vision can feel restricting, tricky. You know, you're afraid to take risks, you're afraid to step on toes. You know, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with putting a lot of energy or thought into something that might get cut or rejected. You know, it can feel weird. I know I felt that way in the past. And inevitably, working on a collaborative project, you're gonna run into this. But you know, I really haven't felt that weirdness working on this project, which is good, which is great. And we've been navigating that well. Everyone's input is considered, and sometimes it works out, other times it doesn't. You know, we have to put a pin in it or drop it, but that's the process. And that process and those talks are held authentically, and everyone's input is met with respect, and I think that's really important. You know, it helps with a project like this, that everyone knows how to get on the same page, and, you know, a strong creative direction is really paramount here, and I think Project Lead has been wielding that really well. And I'm really excited to continue working on this project with such a talented and thoughtful team. But that's all from me. Thanks for listening to my little spiel. I hope that provided some useful or interesting insight into a little peek behind the scenes. But yeah, thank you for hanging out.
Moving on, like any other survival horror game out there, I need puzzles, and for those puzzles I need a way for the player to be able to interact with said puzzles, an interface, if you will. For some godforsaken reason, I decided that the puzzle interfaces would have to be exclusively in 2D. Well, after having made a few, I realized something, and it's that I don't really like it. I don't like how these interfaces would look, and I don't really like how limiting it would be if I wanted to get a little more creative. It would be complicated and not really worth my time. Pretty much all of the games that have inspired me to make IRATO also have 3D puzzle interfaces, so that will be the path that I will take going forward. Now then, for the things that didn't go to plan. You see, whenever my dialogue balloon ends, there's a little animation that makes it fade away to the side. During this little animation, the mouse disappears and the balloon fades. The problem here is that the player can't move the mouse around while the balloon is fading. It all comes down to a viewport method, which is called set input as handled. This method makes sure that the input isn't propagated through the scene tree. What does this mean in actuality though? Basically, if I had called this method at any point anywhere, the input, be it what it may, would start to propagate, and if, say, for example, that input was mouse motion, it would result in you not being able to move the mouse around until the mouse input mode is set as something else in some other bit of code. Removing this little method from everywhere in my balloon resulted in me being able to move around the mouse freely. Lastly, I want to thank you for watching. If you like what we do here, consider donating to our Ko-Fi page. If you feel like chatting, make sure to join the Discord down below in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next devlog. Bye!